Okay, what we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to kind of update you on Conklin's foliar feeding program for our ag products. And I've got some slides here that are really more for me than they are for you. It's really to kind of help me stay on track so I don't get run down some rabbit trail and get distracted. You know, I find that in this day and age, ADHD is a cultural disease. We've all got it. Everybody wants instant everything. And if we don't stay on track, we are down some distant rabbit trail. We go by yield champions, and we represent the Conklin AgriVantage system. And basically the concept there is that our name comes from the fact that today over 50% of all the NCGA state and national winners on an annual basis for probably getting close now to 15, 20 years have been customers of ours using any or in many cases all of our AgriVantage products as a system of crop production. And so we're going to talk about the yield champion products and the AgriVantage system that Conklin manufactures. And so what I ask people is that this is a picture of a variety of people. I'll kind of give you some of the names here. I say, what do all these farmers have in common? Well, you've got Francis Childs, who's deceased now, but Francis still holds the world record for dryland corn yield at, what has it been? 442.14 bushel an acre. And he still holds that as a dryland yield record. And he used a number of our products. In fact, if you go to a website that we've got that just talks about our Amplify product, it's called amplifymycrop.com. It's just a video. There's several videos there, but one of them is a video about Francis, and he talks about his use of all of the Conklin products in his farming operation. Then we got Kip Keller, Steve Albrecht. Steve's now deceased too, but he won the NCGA championship many times. He's from Texas. Jerry Cox, of course, who's still with us. He's got 24 wins at the national level, more than anybody else in the country. And then Gary Porter, who lives right on the Iowa-Missouri line and actually has won in both states, both on corn and milo. In yield. Bill Darrington from just over here into Iowa, expert on foliar feeding. And in fact, there's a really great 10 steps to effective foliar feeding that we've had on our YouTube channel, which I'll talk about more at the end, but it's 300bushelcorn.info. And on that, I think Bill's video has been seen almost 10,000 times. It's probably the most popular video on that channel. Down at the bottom, we got Jay Myers, who's a NCGA state winner from North Dakota many times. Ray Rawson, who held the record for soybeans yields for many, many years. He's from Michigan, Foliar, Michigan. He and his two boys farm over 20,000 acres in northern Michigan. Mike Pekarsky, who's deceased, but I think still holds the record for state of North Dakota. Dave Hula, who has broken the record many, many times. I always tell people if you want to find a farm that's really wore out, it ought to be Dave Hula's because he farms some of the original Jamestown colony in Virginia. And then you've got Charles Hinkebine, who has the record for dryland soybeans at 109 bushel. At any rate, what these guys all have in common is they have what I explain to my wife often is the gift of dissatisfaction. They're never quite satisfied. These guys are not satisfied with 100 bushel soybean and 300 bushel corn. They're not satisfied with 400 bushel corn. And so these guys are always looking for what does it take to go to the next level in yields. They're all world record holders, multi-year NCGA corn yield champions. They're all producers that would not be satisfied with 240 bushel corn or 70 bushel beans, and they regularly use our products to increase their yields, to leverage it. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is foliar feeding tonight, and foliar feeding is one of those huge levers that they use to take their yields to the next level. This magazine, I'm sure a lot of you all get, it's called Progressive Farmer, and I always explain to people, I'm probably like most farmers, I read every word of every article of every magazine I get. Right? No, you don't. They stack up, and when they fall on the floor, Patty says, "You're through with these, right?" And I say, "Yeah, okay." And she throws them in the trash can. When this one came, though, it had Dave Hula's picture on the cover. And I can't even tell you the month or the year it was, but it's been 3-4 years ago. At the time, he had a new world record of 454. Now, I was interested in this because we've had Dave down to field day. We had it at Fall City, Nebraska several years ago. He's used Amplify for many years and some of our other products. And Dave has had the world record several times. He and Dave Hula Randy Dowdy have been kicking it back and forth for the last several years and upping each other. But anyway, when this magazine came out, I started flipping through it because it had Dave's picture on it. But also, as I flipped through it, I found several of guys that I knew. Some of them I'd done meetings with, like Jerry Cox, and they were all guys that I knew were using some of our products. A lot of them were. And so what I decided I was going to do is I was going to read every article, every word. I was going to go through that magazine cover to cover, and I was going to try to answer these questions. What do all the NCGA corn yield champions that were in this issue, what do they all have in common? What are they all doing? Because I thought that'd be a pretty good checklist for at least for us to kind of compare ourselves to. Because a lot of these things I'm sure a lot of you guys are already doing, but there may be one or two that it's like, okay, maybe I've tried that, or maybe I should be doing that. Number one is they all do a complete soil test every year. Now, I tell people maybe not on every single field, but certainly on every competition field they do that. And the key thing here is you need data points. If you want to make changes in your fertility, you've got to monitor what's going on in that soil. Seed treatments. They all use seed treatments for enhanced germination. I'm not talking about insecticides, fungicides, things like that. I'm talking about things like Amplify. Most of them were using Amplify that were listed in this magazine. In-row starters. They all use in-row pop-up starters with their micronutrients going in furrow. The only micronutrients we don't do that with is boron. They all do routine tissue testing, this is different because when I say routine, they go out to a healthy looking field. The average farmer, I would venture to say, normally doesn't tissue test unless they think there's something funky going on. Something's not looking right, there's leaves that are curled, or they're doing something weird, they're turning some different colors other than green. And so they do routine tissue testing because what they're really looking for is they got a good healthy field. They want to know is there a hidden hunger? Is there something that's missing that I can supplement by going across the field and throw a little boron in with my glyphosate or doing things like that? Routine foliar feeding is the next thing. They all do foliar feeding of some kind. Some of them do it just once a year. Some of them do it 3 times a year. I know Steve Albrecht used to do it at least 5 times a year. They all do late season nitrogen applications. And I was just talking to somebody about this today. Late season nitrogen is really important because older varieties, especially of corn, typically took about 25% of the nitrogen after tassel. Today it's more like 40%. It's a change in the genetics. And if we go to these really, really high yields, we need that late season nitrogen to keep the plant from what Jerry Cox says. You don't want your corn to die down. You want it to dry down. You want it to go to maturity, pack as much starch and oil and everything into that kernel as you can. So, because really, if you stop and think about it, we talk about bushels a lot, but what are we really producing? We're really producing tonnage of grain. So the density is really, really important. You get some of these guys that can produce corn, high yield corn, with a test weight of 62, 65, 67 pounds per bushel. That's a huge difference in what you get paid for that crop. So late season foliar nitrogen application has a lot to do with it. Number 7 is they're always learning. I think the best example I can remember experiencing with this was I was in Omaha, Nebraska, and I was at a Pro Ag, and in fact Jordan was sitting right in front of me, and across the aisle, in fact Brian, you were at that program, it was a Pro Ag 2, and across the aisle from Jordan was sitting Jerry Cox. Jerry Cox had been there several times. In fact, I was with Jerry doing a meeting down in Marshall, Missouri this last winter, and somebody asked Jerry after we were through with our meeting, they said, how many times have you been to Pro Ag 1? Our 2-day crop production intensive. He says, well, thanks for a minute. He says at least 3 dozen times. Now he's been working with us and using some of our products for up to 14 years, but 3 dozen times means he goes at least 2 to 3 times a year. Not once a year, every year, but 2 to 3 times a year. And so Jerry Cox is sitting there across the aisle from Jordan, but next to him is sitting Kip Cullers. At the time had the world record for soybeans at 160.6, and next to him was his wife Michelle, sitting right there next to him at the program. And sitting in front of Michelle was a guy by the name of Anthony Della Rocco, who was from New York State, who was an NCGA National Yield winner, flown from New York State to Omaha, Nebraska to go through Midwest Labs, then to go through our 2-day soil science intensive. Ben was sitting next to a guy a couple of years ago now by the name of Mike Heimbach. And Mike is a dairy farmer from Pennsylvania. And Ben looks at Mike and he says, you look familiar. He says, you've been here before. And the guy says, yeah. He says, I've been here every year for the last 3 years. He says, well, why do you come all the way from Pennsylvania to Omaha, Nebraska to go through a ProAg 2? He says, well, he says, I can't afford not to. And he goes on to explain, in fact, we got a little video clip of that on 300 bushel corn where he talks about, he says, every year I'm getting anywhere from a 10 to 20 bushel per acre yield increase and lowering my cost of production every year for the last 3 years. He says, I can't afford not to come here for the educational component. So these guys are always learning, and I think that's really the key to going to the next level, is you got to have the gift of dissatisfaction. You got to be willing to learn and do the things that are, you know, some people aren't teachable. I tell our distributors and our managers that we work with, if you've got a guy who's a farmer, and he might even be a significant, large-scale farmer, he might be very successful, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's a good candidate for using our program. If he's not willing to grow and to learn, because the educational component of what we do is as much as important as the products that we talk about. So, foliar feeding is the key to maximum yields. The keys to foliar feeding are applying the foliar nutrients at the right stage of plant growth. Now, we're going to talk about two aspects tonight of foliar feeding. We're going to talk about fertility, because we all think, and we should, that NPK, the 17 essential nutrients that we know it takes to grow a healthy corn plant, are all needed, and foliar feeding is one of the ways to get some of those nutrients into the plant. The thing, though, that we're going to talk about at the end is, after we talk about foliar nutrition in the terms of fertilizers and what it takes to get effective fertility into the plant through foliar applications, we're going to talk about plant growth regulators, because that's become even a bigger part and a higher payback in many cases than basic fertility. So we want to apply foliar nutrients at the right stage of plant growth. There are certain times when the plant is very, very susceptible to drawing in additional. It's going through rapid growth. It's using up the nutrients. It can't pull it from the soil fast enough. Second of all, we want to use the right products. Neutral pH, low salt index products that are well suited for foliar applications. We want to use them under the right weather conditions. You know, there are certain times when the plant is much more receptive in drawing in nutrients. And then we want to use the right equipment. The way to put the product on, in the right product in the right way and at the right time, is really key. It can frequently, though, it doesn't always take a special trip over the field. So, because it can frequently be done in co-application with herbicides, fungicides, plant growth regulators, eliminating another trip over the field. Because let's face it, labor and equipment and diesel fuel, they're all expensive. And every time you go across that field, you got significant costs involved in doing that. So if you can piggyback applications, and I got to tell you, we aren't going to spend a lot of time about them tonight, but under this umbrella that Conklin has, we call AgroVantage products, there's really three subgroupings of products. There's a group of wetting agents, compatibility agents, pH control agents, drift retardants, all the types of things you put with herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, even fertility products to make them work more effectively. We don't sell any of those herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides, but we sell products that make them much more effective. And so one of the things here that's really key is that if people just understood what we offer in that particular subgrouping of products, that's a huge thing, and we're talking, in some cases, pennies an acre. Give you an example. We got a product called Complete. Complete is a liquid AMS product. AMS, ammonium sulfate, is something that Monsanto says you've got to add to glyphosate, to your water, before you add the glyphosate, if you want the glyphosate to work. Well, why is that? Well, a lot of people think it's to acidify. It's not to acidify. It's to neutralize the hard water minerals, so that you condition the water, and when you condition the water, now you're not going to tie up the glyphosate with the water solution. It's going to be able to do what it's supposed to do in terms of weed control. Well, interesting thing is, our Complete product is much easier to handle than the dry bags of AMS, and typically about half the cost per acre. So we got a win-win deal. It's easier for the farmer to use, comes in totes, comes in fives, but it's also a product that makes everything that you're doing work better. And that's really key. I had a call yesterday morning from a large farming operation out here in western Nebraska who needed some combined. They had a couple of chemicals that they were mixing that without combined, they weren't going to mix, without making some other significant changes in their mixture in terms of increasing the water content, the number of gallons we're going across the field with per acre, and so forth. So combined is one of those products that is a product that it controls pH, but it also allows chemicals to go in suspension that otherwise might not. Here's a couple of books that I want to point out that I have some copies of here tonight. In fact, somebody picked up, I think, Mike. Okay, here's one for corn, here's one for soybeans. What these are is these are books that Jerry Cox tells you that he carries in his pickup all the time during the growing season. They show the growth stages of the corn plant, in this case, and the soybean plant in this case, so that you know exactly, when we talk about foliar feeding, what stage that plant is in. Because at certain stages, we're determining certain things. In the case of corn, for example, I don't think I'm going to go into more detail on my slides tonight, but in corn, between the V3 and V5, that corn plant's going through a really critical decision-making process. You know, it's all subconscious, but it's making a decision how many rows around what's the girth of that ear going to be. And the genetics are such that it can figure out, okay, if I'm short of boron or zinc or potash, I'm going to go to 20 instead of 22. Or I'm going to go to 22 instead of 24. And when you reduce it by 1 or 2 rows around, 2 or 4, that's going to have a significant impact on yield. So V3 to V5 is a really, really critical stage. V8 to V12 is going to be a critical stage because that's where we're going to determine the length of the ear, how many silks it's going to throw, and how long those ears are going to be at that they're going to fill out to the tip. So the corn development book is really a key one. These are both available from Iowa. I've got a box of them here because I just find it's really convenient if I can just get them in people's hands. A pair of them is about $50. You can actually get this one on a digital format that you can download for your iPad for like $5. They don't have that on this one as far as I know yet. But anyway, the two of them, they're really pricey because their shipping for some reason is really high. But I've got copies here. I buy them a bunch at a time, so I'll have them. But if you're interested in some of those, see me, or if you're watching the video, contact our office and we'll get you a set of those. But these are really key for being able to know exactly what stage your crop is in. Now let's talk about selecting the right product. There's a big difference in fertility materials. There can be considerably quality differences between NPK materials that are being sold and promoted as suitable for starter or foliar feeding fertilizers. There's a lot of different raw materials, and when you come to ProAg 1 and especially ProAg 2, you'll get a lot of a breakdown, and you'll get a great understanding of where these different fertilizer materials start and why some are very much more available and recoverable. One of the things you'll learn at our educational seminars, we do a program with Corey Oberlander, and one of the key things that Corey kind of dispels a lot of myths for people. Corey's a guy that really understands fertility. That's his niche in the market. And one of the things, for instance, he says is, how do most people put on most of their fertilizer today? And that's always the first question I ask farmers is, I said, what's your normal fertility program now? And how's it working for you? But the key thing he talks about is that most guys they'll spread a lot of their dry fertilizers in the spring, and they put a lot of their nitrogen on in a lot of cases in the fall. And he says that's totally backwards, because nitrogen will move away from you. You really don't want to do anything other than spring applications. But he says in the case of NPK in dry broadcast form, other than the nitrogen, you're really probably not going to get much application or utilization out of that this season. Now, if you do that every year, you'll get some carryover, okay? But really, those P and K formulations should be applied in the fall so they have time to break down, and some of them become available for spring use. The metal contents, and this is something that I think is really key. A lot of guys look at a label and they want to know, well, how much NPK is in there? How much, is there micronutrients in there, and so forth. But the metal content limits limitations detailed in Monsanto's fact sheet on NPK fertilizers suitable for use with Roundup Max formulas are often exceeded by the lower priced, lower quality materials in the marketplace. In other words, if you test a product for just NPK or NPK and micros, it might look fine, but if you didn't test for lead, mercury, cadmium, things like that are really heavy metals that take forever to ever be processed by your soil and can really cause significant delay in emergence or germination, that's a problem. So a lot of times it's not the things that we test for. In fact, a classic example, probably the worst example I could possibly pick out, is down here in St. Joe, Missouri. There was a hide tanning company down there that had this slurry that came off after it was kind of like a chemical that was used up at a certain point, and they'd have to flush the system, and they'd have to take this chemical and get rid of it. I've always thought the perfect business would be one where you could get somebody to pay you to haul it away and somebody else pay you to deliver it to them, right? And that's exactly what happened. They took the sample of this and they took it to the folks in the government, and they said, hey, could we sell this as a fertilizer? And they tested it and said, yeah, it's got some NPK in it. Sure. They never tested for chromium, I think it was, that is a cancer-causing agent. And now they got about 25,000 acres down there close to St. Joe that they can't farm anymore, because they started seeing all kinds of brain tumors and everything else coming up because they didn't test for the things that really were potentially harmful. So anyway, so it's important to know what's in your fertilizer that's not desirable as much as it is what is there that could be utilized. But the form that it's in makes a big difference. Do not use UAN, urea ammonium nitrate, in any kind of foliar applications. 28s and 32s are just way too hot. They're going to burn the leaf surface, and what you want is a material that's not going to be burning that surface. Avoid fertilizers that derive their phosphorus from ammonium phosphate. 1034O, most of those are ammonium phosphate, because again, that ammonium is nitrogen and it's going to burn. Avoid fertilizers that derive their potassium from KCl. Potassium chloride is a salt. You know, you wouldn't think about putting sodium chloride, salt, table salt, on your fields. You shouldn't put on KCl either. So there are sources of potassium and sulfur that are not harmful to the plant, but you got to be careful about the raw materials that you're using. So time of day, evening or early morning, before 9 is usually best. Temperatures 65 to 85 is ideal, is 70, but the humidity, you'd love to have it greater than 70% relative humidity. Temperature and humidity combined, if you take the temperature right now and the humidity and you combine it, and if it falls in that range of 140 to 160, you're kind of in the sweet spot. Wind speed, less than 5 miles an hour. You don't necessarily want to have a lot of drift. And so that's really the rainfall within 24 to 48 hours after a foliar application may reduce the application effectiveness. You want it to kind of sit on the leaf surface. One of the products that are brand new in our line that we're going to talk about is Syntos. Syntos is an ag sugar. It's packaged and it's designed to be used with foliar applications, and literally it'll help it stick to the leaf surface so you get better application in foliar applications. It can be used in furrow too to stimulate microbial activity, which is a good thing in the soil. This is kind of a bad representation of a slide that's really, really good that Denny Damon developed. And it basically explains some fundamental concepts about foliar feeding that you've probably never understood. Most people don't. A lot of people go out there and here they're applying to this corn. They're foliar feeding this corn, and it's V3 to V5. Okay, so it's at early stage. Well, how big is that corn plant? You know, 6, 7, 8 inches tall, something like that. And the guy says, yeah, but he says, I'm putting a lot of fertilizer out there on the ground. Yes, you are. That's true. But here's the thing. What you're doing is you're not necessarily trying to get that plant to suck all that NPK in through the leaves. What we're really doing is stimulating the plant. We're enhancing the cellular-based chlorophyll synthesis. We're stimulating the plant. It's stimulating the plant to increase the demand for water and leaf in the vascular system of the plant. So what we do is we stimulate, we tickle the plant, we say, hey, you really need to draw up more nutrients and moisture from the soil. So it stimulates additional root growth and root stimulation to increase the uptake of water and nutrients as a result, and additional root growth and soil microbial activity comes off as well. In fact, there's a great little video. I've got both a short 3-minute version and a 30-minute version on 300bushelcorn.info that basically shows you close up under a microscope what's going on next to that root system. What happens is that root system exudes certain nutrients, and there's microbial activity in the soil that kind of surrounds those roots. Well, what happens is eventually those microbes die and their bodies then become fertilizer for the plant. But anyway, what happens is you stimulate this plant because you've got to get more coming up from the root system, because in order for you to grow an extra bushel of corn, that plant on a per acre basis has to uptake another 56 pounds or develop another 56 pounds of glucose. It takes 56 pounds of glucose to generate 1 bushel of corn. So what we're doing is we're really stimulating the plant to draw more nutrient up through the soil. It's not, in fact, if you said, okay, I'm going to foliar feed 3 or 4, maybe 5 gallons at the high end on corn, and I'm going to foliar feed it, and I get a 7 bushel yield response. Well, if you figure out the amount of NPK that was in that 3 gallons of fertilizer, and how much NPK is actually in the additional 7 bushel of grain, there's no way it came from the fertilizer into the plant, into corn. No way. What you've done is you've stimulated the plant to do a better job of developing sugars. So that's the key, is that foliar feeding is not force feeding nutrients into the leaf surface. It's stimulating the plant to draw more up through the root system. Make sense? And that's the concept that a lot of people just say, oh, foliar feeding can't work. It doesn't work the way you think it works. It works. You can't argue with the results, but the fact is it's not how you think it generates it. I've got a copy of these charts for every one of you tonight, and they'll be available. They're available on our website too, but we've got a chart here, and these have been developed by Dennis Naiman from CropMax, and he uses them in our ProAg 1s, and that's really where you understand how to use them. But this one is not an interactive slide. I've got them where it comes in, but the very first thing you want to do is, number 1 out here, is you want to do a tissue test somewhere before this V3. Because again, remember, this V3 to V5 is a sweet spot because we're determining girth of the ear. So what we want to do out here is we want to take a sample of that plant. You take the entire sample above ground, you send it in, you take a dozen samples across your field, send it into Midwest Labs. You should do it overnight. We're so close to Omaha, I run a lot of samples up there when we do this. But then what you want to do is you come in here and you foliar feed. Now you can piggyback this with, say, a glyphosate application, because that's where a lot of these, that they're going to be applying that product at this point. So you can add in some boron or some zinc or some manganese or whatever you need there for micros, and maybe even a gallon of Feast 918-9 or 318-18. So that's where you would do your first foliar. Then you could take another tissue sample if you wanted to in here, and you could again do it at the V8 to V12 would be the second sweet spot. If you miss these spots, the best thing to do is try to do it better next time. You really don't waste your money on spraying in here. What we represent here is this side of the peak is the vegetative stage of that crop. We want to build a good foundation, good base under that crop. We want a healthy crop that has good plant health and resistance to disease. Because here we're into R1, reproductive stage. Now we're in the process of going through pollination. This is pollination, and we're getting ear fill and that kind of thing here. So what we want to do here is, this is the third foliar feeding, and in this case we wouldn't use a 918-9 or 318-18. We'd use our Feast XL. This 2600.5 boron is a non-burning form of nitrogen, and 2 to 3 gallons per acre will give you a good growth and additional nitrogen for that ear fill. That's really what we're looking for. And so again, if you miss these windows, try better next time. That's really what we tell people. And the books that we talked about, these will show you where those sweet spots are, so you can judge every field based on those staging tools. This is where we talked about that third spot right back here. When is that? Well, this is pollination's taking place. Once pollination's finished, the silks turn brown. Once the silks have turned brown, pollination's already taken place. Now we're doing grain fill. So these ears are starting to fill out those kernels. So it's after brown silk is when we want to put on this last application. You could be putting that on with maybe a fungicide to improve plant health, but that's where you'd put on that product. 10 days to 2 weeks after silking, the seed fill has now commenced. Root system growth has slowed dramatically, so this is where foliar feeding is going to help you with that additional nitrogen. You can get an additional 5% kernel size, test weight, and kernel density improvement potential. Test weight and kernel density, is what you're really looking for with this kind of an application. Aerial application is really the only way to do it. And the Feast XL 2600.5 boron is the product that we recommend you use. This gives you some ideas. These are just some ranges, but these are based on data we've got. If your corn was 100 bushel potential yield, At the V3 to V5 you foliar fed, you can pick up 3 to 6 bushel. At the V8 to V12 you could pick up 2 to 4. If you did the R2 with the Feast XL, you could pick up another 5 to 10 bushel. If you had 250 bushel corn, you can see potentially, a lot more increase in yield. So if you've got again, a foliar feed is not a rescue operation. Foliar feed is a way to enhance an already healthy crop to go to the next level. That's really what we're trying to communicate. So here's the profit potential for foliar feeding on corn here with our 318.18 or 918.9 at V4. Again, 5 to 10 bushel. And if you look at the cost of the fertilizer materials of $7.50 to $15, you're looking at an added potential net profit of an additional $15 to $50 an acre. On here using the same products, another 5 to 10 bushel. Here you've got it at the V8 stage. Here you've got the last. So if you did just those 3 foliar applications, potential is there for a significant increase in yields on a good healthy corn crop. Here's what Jerry Cox uses. And I happen to have had the pleasure of doing, I don't know how many dozens of meetings with Jerry Cox around the country. And I happen to remember a day, I think it was the 20th of January, we were in Falkton, South Dakota. I was sitting in a meeting, I had introduced Jerry, and I was sitting there, and Jerry had a Sprint phone, Denny. I had my Verizon phone. He had 0 coverage up there. I had good coverage. So he's up there presenting, and they had just that day, while we were at the meeting, they were announcing the winners of the NCGA competition. So Jerry's up front talking, explaining what he does. He's talking about this kind of stuff about his foliar feeding. And this had been the season before had been the first year he'd done foliar feeding. He won 4 national titles. And I was sitting there, and I knew it before he did. And so I had to break the news to him. But he had 4 national titles. That's the most he's ever had in 1 year. It was the year that he did foliar feeding for the first time on every acre. And he now does it on every acre of his 2,000 acres. But he uses the Feast fertilizers made specifically for seed placement and puts those on in furrow. But then he sprays late in the day, so he uses the same materials he's using in furrow from Conklin. He's using those as his foliar. He uses high pressures. He says you want at least 75 pounds pressure. Never spray above 86 degrees. And again, 70% Fahrenheit and 70% relative humidity are kind of ideal. Combined temperature and humidity in that range of 140 to 160. And he says always use a calendar, and he uses, again, these books for crop staging. Here's the specific products that he uses in his foliar. At V3 to V4, he puts on our 318.18 at 2 gallons per acre. He puts on 10% boron at a half a pint. Boron should never be applied in furrow, but you can put it on with your liquid N, you can band it, you can broadcast it, you can put it down 2 by 2 with some nitrogen. A planting is a good application, but you never want to put it in furrow. But you can foliar apply it, and this is what he's doing here, half pint per acre. And again, this is based on his tissue sample. He says no matter how much I try to peg my fertility, he says I always find that I'm short of boron and zinc when I do the tissue tests. So he puts on a half pint per acre of the boron and half pint per acre of the zinc. He puts on 10 ounces of our foliar Excito. And we're going to talk tonight about 3 different plant growth regulators that we have available. And the plant growth regulator that he's talking about here, Excito, is a plant cytokinin. We have 2 forms. We have a foliar applied, that's what he's using here. We have one that goes in furrow, that's a soil applied. But he puts on 10 ounces per acre here. And then he puts on our Rainfast. Rainfast is a 100% active ingredient wetting agent, and he puts that right into this combination with some water to make it 8 to 10 gallons total solution. Okay, so this is diluted down with water, and he always makes sure that that water's been tested, and he uses our combined and complete to make sure that the water is not going to react with anything that he's mixing in there. So he puts this on at that V3 to V4. He comes back at V8 and he does the same thing, except he leaves out the Excito. The quicker you can get the Excito on, because what Excito does is it increases cell size and speeds up cell division. So those are the 2 things that you want to see happening to speed up growth. So that's basically the only difference between his V3 to V4 and his V8 is he leaves out the Excito. So here's the soybean chart I won't spend a lot of time going through it, but here's where they recommend the foliar feed between the R3 and R5. That's the second foliar feed. And then he goes in here at the R6.5 and to 7. This is beginning of maturity. So this is where we're putting on pods and we're filling pods is what we want to be doing here. And again, here's some data that we've got. If you had 40 bushel beans and you put on the foliar at V4 to R1, 2 to 4 bushel is common. Manganese. Manganese is a key one. If you're using Roundup on Roundup Ready soybeans, you really always need to, anytime you spray, you need to be putting in a pint of our chelated manganese. This is something that first came out about 14 years ago now. Dr. Huber out of Purdue and Barney Gordon down here at K-State did a lot of research to find out that when you see yellow flash in soybeans, what's triggered that is a restriction of the ability of that plant to uptake enough manganese, and it slows the plant down and you create a yield drag. They found out that if you'll just add 1 pint of manganese along with your glyphosate, and Monsanto says, okay, but be careful, it's got to be 100% EDTA chelated, otherwise it has the potential to tie up your glyphosate and it won't get the weed kill that you want. So that's why it's critical, always put a pint, and that's one of the things Kip says, that's the lowest hanging fruit. He says you never, ever apply glyphosate without a pint of manganese. And half bushel to 10 bushel, is what they've seen. I tell people the least I've seen is 2 to 3. I've seen higher, but a 2 to 3, 2 bushel at $8 beans is a $16 return on less than a $4 investment. And depending on how you buy it, you can get significantly less than $4. R3 to V5 again if you foliar. So if you picked up a couple bushel here, 3 bushel here, that's 5. Picked up another 2, that's 7 bushel yield response out of 3 foliar type applications. This one doesn't take anything special over the field. If they were 60 bushel beans to start with, now you're talking taking those to 70. If they were 80 bushel beans, now you're talking about the potential of hitting 100 bushel. And for a lot of guys, that's kind of the target. They'd like to hit 100 bushel soybeans and 300 bushel corn. And so again, here, again at V4 to R1, at using the Feast XL later on, profit potential of an extra 2 to 8 bushel per acre in each of those applications. You can see some really significant yield results. And again, it's the idea of taking and leveraging that healthy crop to the next level. That's where your profit potential is. A lot of guys, especially when we've had corn at $3 for a few years here, and we've had soybeans at 7, 8 bushel, a lot of guys are saying, I'm not going to spend any more money. Well, I understand what they're saying. They're saying I have to control my input costs. I understand that. But if you have the opportunity to spend, let's say, $4 on a pint of manganese and see a $16 return, that's not a dollar you should not spend. Because you cannot, Kip Cullers, I love what he says, you cannot save yourself into prosperity. You got to spend money to make money. And how many guys do you know that are saying, well, I'm not going to spend any money on seed this year. I'm just not going to do that. No, that you have to have certain. And so a lot of guys, they'll look at foliar feeding and other things like we're talking about tonight as an optional investment. Well, it may be optional, but it may be one that's the most profitable dollar you can spend. Here's our wheat production now, and again, I've got these charts for you tonight, but this shows you in wheat, this is what they call a Feast scale, and you can see different applications here. Here's the uptake curve of nutrients, and so one of the key things is row starters. You can put a starter kit on a drill. You can get some Feast 9189, 824 or some Psychic in furrow. The Guardian product is really key. If you're doing early nitrogen applications, Guardian holds onto that nitrogen additive that you add. The flag leaf, at that stage, you want to be using the Feast XL. Later on here at the boot stage, you maybe want to put some additional Feast XL. You also want to talk about foliar Excito in the spring on winter wheat. And so when you do a broadcast herbicide application, putting in piggy-backing, we're going to talk about the other plant growth regulators because those really have some potential for wheat. And again, the foliar feeding on wheat, we can see some pretty significant response from the early foliar, the herbicide and fungicide piggyback, and also with the late fungicide. Here's some effect on spring wheat. This was Feast XL used on spring wheat in Dickinson, North Dakota. Went from 60 bushel to 63.7. So 3 bushel yield response. And this was applied with their wide match chemical and some 2,4-D and 2 ounces of this Propermax. And they put on, let's see, we're looking at, I'm guessing that's just a couple of, 1 gallon. Just adding 1 gallon to that mix that they're putting on that wheat. So 1 gallon, probably $7 by the time you get delivery and everything. $7 got them 3 bushel. Well, wheat's been pretty depressed, but even at $4 wheat, you know, 3 bushel is $12 return on a $6 or $7 investment. Alfalfa is probably, I tell people, of all the crops that are out there, probably the one that has most profit potential. You look at the potential for foliar feeding and the potential for increased tonnage and hay quality. Forages probably have the most dramatic potential. What we recommend here is that you do a foliar after every cutting. And we've actually got a formula, and we've got it posted to our website that shows you exactly from seeding a new crop, the things that you should do to make sure you get a healthy stand, because you never get a chance, you know, that stand could last you 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. But if you don't get it started right, you know, the potential is never going to be there. 2 to 4 gallons of Feast 918-9 or 318-18 they would put on after every cutting. 2 to 4 quarts of Feast Sidekick. Sidekick is our 002517, so it's high potash, high sulfur, seed-safe sulfur, good foliar application. 8 ounces of our Foliar Excito, again. And now the boron is really critical, as well as the calcium in a micronutrient mix like that. And then we use our Rainfast, our 100% active ingredient. Delmer Yoder over here at Iowa has done a field day for several years and does a great job with it. If you go over there and you have a chance to actually see them doing harvesting, they use our ProServe forage and silage preservative. But here's his formula. He uses 3 gallons of Feast 918-9, 1 gallon of our Feast Sidekick, 1 pint of our chelated calcium, 1 pint of complex boron, and 1 pint of Feast chelated manganese. So those are the 3 that he puts on. Factory direct, total cost of about $36 an acre. The optional 10 ounces of Foliar Excito would be another $9, and Feast chelated zinc. A lot of guys would put that on as well. But so you're looking at, you know, $40, $50. But if you can get an extra ton, I know the first year that Charles used on his farm, and he loves growing high quality alfalfa. He's the owner of the company, and he the very first year he put on Excito. The very next cutting, where they used it versus where they didn't, they got 3/4 of a ton more hay. Well, if a ton of hay is worth a couple $100, 3/4 of a ton, what's that figure out to, Rich? A couple hundred times 3/4 would be $150 return on a $40 or $50 investment. You know, pretty good investment. And it keeps the crop healthy, plus you're not only increasing tonnage, but you're increasing hay quality as well. And a lot of these dairies and folks, they want quality hay. They pay based on the test weight and the RFV. Here's his grass hay program. He uses 2 gallons of our Feast XL, 1 gallon of Feast Sidekick, a gallon of Feast 918-9, a pint of our Feast chelated calcium, a pint of boron, and again, you're talking about a $35 per acre investment, but it really leverages that hay to the next level. Kip Colors actually does not have the current world record. I think Randy Dowdy now has the world record for beans at like 170 bushel. I can guarantee you Kip's hunting for the next record. But Kip, he developed this product over a period of over a dozen years down in Brazil. And I've talked to Kip different times, and we've talked about the fact that he's been going down there for years. Pioneer and Monsanto, they take him around the country because of his yields and his reputation. And he says the thing he loves about working in Brazil is they do what he tells them to do. They don't argue with him. They just do it. And he says the other thing is this. When he developed this product, Kip Colors Nutrient Compass Foliar Fertilizer, we call it foliar fertilizer, but really it's more of a plant growth regulator. That the combination, if you look at the label, you can read what's there, but I'm sure there's lots of things there that you're not able to see. But Kip says he tells a story about how he says, I think we plugged up every sprayer in Brazil at one time or another. But he says when the farmer farms 100,000 acres, he never hears about the sprayer that was plugged up. The guy that cleans out the manure pit, you know, he's the guy that's dealing with the sprayer. And so this guy never hears about it. So he says, not only will they do what you tell them to do, but he says that they're not worried about things like that. You know, will it increase yields? Well, Kip Keller's Nutrient Compass, this is our name for the product. Kip brought it to the Conklin Company. In fact, I can tell you the story. This goes back at least 5-6 years now. And Kip had just gotten back from one of his many trips to Brazil. And Michelle, his wife, who's a very bright gal, she says to Kip, she says, so is this product ready to bring to the United States yet? And he says, yeah. He says, I think it is. Who do you think we should work with? Well, Michelle, as I told you, she's a really sharp gal. They got 2 little kids, and she's thinking, you know, Kip, you really shouldn't be going to Brazil every 2 weeks, and you should be here. At any rate, she's also pretty bright, and she says, you know, I think we ought to work with the Conklin Company. They'd been using a number of our products for several years. And so they knew Charles and Judy Herbster. And so Kip just picks up the phone, he calls Charles, and he says, hey, he says, what are you doing, where are you at today? And Charles says, I'm in Kansas City. And he says, you got plans for dinner? He says, I want to buy you dinner. So they drove up to Kansas City. Purdy, Missouri is down in the south west corner of Missouri. Of course, Kansas City is kind of, you know, straight north. And so they drove up there, had dinner with him that night. And here's the genius of what Michelle was telling Kip. Kip is a guy that's very outspoken. He's very direct. And even though he's done a lot of speaking for Pioneer and Monsanto and things like that, she's thinking he needs to work with somebody like Charles that owns the company, not a board of directors in Chicago or New York or St. Louis. And so those would be just a total frustration to him. So he basically explained to Charles that he developed this product in South America. They were getting really great results with it. It's a quarter product. You add it right to your glyphosate as you're spraying across the field, and we're seeing some really good yield results. And so Charles and he worked to plan up that over a period of 3 years, we ran several thousands of test plots. I'm going to show you some of the data on it. And it's a product we can virtually use on any growing crop. But here's what it does. It stimulates the plant so that you get larger leaf surface. But it also stimulates root mass as well. And so you're dealing with not just whatever's above ground, but he developed it over 14 years down there in Brazil. They had a lot of data on it, and they wanted to bring it up here. Well, here's some pictures that were actually from South America. And you can see the difference here on the larger root mass, but look at the nodulation difference. This is not a great picture, but look at the nodulation difference here on these soybean plants that are the same size, same age I should say, but with and without what he calls Kip Solo down there. This I translated for those of you who can't read Portuguese. This is the English translation. This is the control corn. This is the corn with Kip Keller's Nutrient Compass 8 days after the second application. You can put on a first application in that V3 to V5. What we've talked about before is kind of that critical point, that sweet spot. But you can also put on a second application. Now the second application, you can tell, is before tassel. So it's before that reproductive stage. Not really nearly, number one, I tell guys, from our data, and you'll see it in the numbers I show you, we'll always get the biggest bang for our buck in this first application versus the second application because it's a product that's going to stimulate additional growth. Well, when do you want that? Well, the earlier the better, right? Because if I can get more leaves out there and the plant gets healthier to start with, the potential, I can add it out here and I'll get response. In fact, Dwayne Rogie is one of the first guys that used it here in Nebraska, and he saw that, and I think I've got his data in here. But anyway, so this gives you different data or different ways that we can use the products, but it talks about 1 to 2 quarts. It's 1 quart at a time, but you could apply it 1 quart a couple different times during growing season. Here's from 2013. This was our first test year. Jerry Cox, this was his results. He got a 7 bushel per acre where he put on 1 quart at V8. So V8's kind of getting to the outside of that window. But at $2.50 a quart, which was our basic cost, and that really hasn't changed a lot, at $3 corn, that was an extra added net of $13 an acre plus. Here's his results on corn a year later in 2014. He got it on a little earlier, V4 at 1 quart, and he got an extra 8.9 bushels, so a little bit better response. That if again at the cost at $7.50 and $3 corn, that's an added $19 an acre added net. Here's his soybeans, same 2 years. 13, he got an extra 3.1 bushel. At V6, it was applied. That was an extra added net of $17 at $8 beans. And in 14, he got an extra 3 bushel. Pretty consistent there. And at $8 beans, again, that's an extra $16 an acre added net. So really nice response. Now here's from Juniata, Nebraska. Todd Hoffman out there farms a couple thousand acres. His control strip in 14 was 252 bushel, where he used 1 quart of cupus. At V3 to V5, he got 263. That was applied at V5 with glyphosate, 1 pint of manganese and boron versus manganese and boron only. In Auburn, this is Dwayne Rogies. Dwayne had 199 acre or a bushel per acre control strip. Where he used it, he got 222. So 23 bushel, which is higher than I'd ever tell anybody to expect. But that was his results. And with the second application, that was pre-tassel, right? Just as recommended, he picked up an extra 4 bushel, which 4 bushel for an extra $8 is still pretty profitable. I always tell people, you got to remember, farming is risky, right, Dwayne? But stop and think about what you're able to do. If you can drop a seed in the ground in April or even May, and 5-6 months later, you can take off a crop, and you can turn, in this case, at $8 into 20 bushel, well, let's say 7 bushel, to be conservative, really conservative. $3 corn at 7 bushels, a $20 return, $20 back on a $7 investment, $8 investment. You know, there's no place in the stock market we can do that, is there, Dwayne? So you got to remember, there is huge opportunity there. At Sterling, Chris Beavers, whose dad was in the NCGA competition for many, many years, and Chris is a really good farmer. You can tell by his data here. His control strip was 61.45, not 61.5. It was 61.45, where he used 1 quart of compass, foliar 2 times, meaning he put it on, first of all, with his glyphosate at V3. He put on a 2nd quart at R4 with his fungicide. And so you look at the difference, you know, he got over 13 bushel yield response on his soybeans. So really a good response. Now, this is probably the best single set of data we've got on Nutrient Compass. And again, I classify this as a plant growth regulator, really. We call it a foliar fertilizer, but it's really plant growth regulator. 32 different hybrids. This was an independent third-party testing organization out in central Nebraska. They did 3 replications each. This was in 2014. The range and increase in yield, nothing went backwards. They went from 2 to 27 bushel with 1 quart of Nutrient Compass of V5, and the average was 12 bushel an acre. So that's their average on 3 replications each on 32 hybrids from a variety of different seed companies. Here's on wheat. This is Tom Liebig out of Juanita, Nebraska. He was a classmate of Stan Smith's in high school, and they've known each other for many, many years. He wanted to try some back in 16, and he applied 1 quart of compass with the quilt fungicide at 9.5 ounces in the quilt, later than recommended at flag leaf, but the control yielded 58 bushels. The Nutrient Compass strip yielded 74 bushel, or a plus 16 bushel an acre. And when I asked Dwayne, or when I was asking Tom about this, and I was trying to get the economics worked out, I said, well, what's wheat worth? I couldn't believe it. At the current price of wheat at that time was $3.31 a bushel, you know, which was terrible. But even then, it generated an extra $45 an acre added net profit. So I mean, it's just it's the dollars you get for the dollars you spend. That's really the only thing that really matters. So the product now is available across the country. We don't have limited quantities. When Dwayne got his first product, when most of us got, we were limited on how much we could get. I was telling somebody the other day, every single person that I've got that's tried Nutrient Compass is now using it on every acre every year. This is a brand new product that we're selling lots and lots of. Centos, for years. In fact, the first person I ever heard talk about it was years ago. We used to do some meetings with Ray Rawson, and in fact, I just talked to Ray about 2 months ago. He was down in Florida for spending part of his winter down there, but he and his boys farmed 23,000 acres up there in Falwell, Michigan. And he was telling me at the time, this was, Ben, 15 years ago, they were putting on a pound of sugar every time they went across their field up to a maximum of 10 pounds per acre per year. They would get in bulk tanker loads. And so we've had guys, Dwayne, you've bought it in semi-loads from ADM and other places. You know, we've got guys that have just gone all kinds of different places looking for sugar. So we've for years said, you know, we really should come out with a sugar that's specifically designed for ag. And so that's what we've got with Syntos. Syntos is a product that is a combination of 3 different types of sugar, and it also has fulvic acid blended into it, 1%. And the fulvic acid really is good for the health of the plant. So we would dribble a pint of this down the furrow with any of your fertilizers and different products that you're using. In addition, we'd use a pint of it anytime you're going over the top of the crop, spraying it, including any foliar application. The brand new product that we just came out with, this is a third plant growth regulator. I would count the Excito products. Soil and Foliar is the first of our products. That was their plant cytokinins, so different mode of action. Our second product that we came out with was the Nutrient Compass, that's just been out really nationwide for this will be the second year. The third product here is the Intensify. And Intensify is a brand new product that we developed. Kip developed, actually started using it in South America. And here's what Kip's told me about this product. He says this product is 3 times as concentrated as other plant growth regulators on the market, and it's half the cost. That's kind of how the economics work. The retail on this is $7 an acre. This one container, and our chemist who came from Monsanto, she said, I can put this into a dry form, it'll be easier to ship. And so that's exactly what we've done. So this one container will do 50 acres in furrow or foliar applications. And so retail is $350 per unit, and that'll do 50 acres at $7 an acre. So it's a great product. I just had a guy call yesterday. Well, he wanted 10 units. He wanted enough for 500 acres. We had another guy, Jordan had another guy order another 10 of these yesterday, wasn't it? Or was it 10? And so we've had a lot of guys. Rich, you've had some guys order how much?
80.
Huh?
80 of them.
80 of them. You know, it's a great product. It's easy to ship. You get a box of it from UPS, and you know you get a $10 shipping bill. I mean, that's one of the things that's really, really nice about it. But anyway, this product, we actually at National Convention they gave us a little vial of it, and you mix it in. You pour it in some water, and literally before it can get to the bottom, it's dispersed. Doesn't take any agitation at all. If you put it in fertilizer, one little jiggle and it's in suspension. It really mixes easily with just everything we've found. And once it's in suspension, there's nothing that's going to settle out. So it's a great product. And again, what this product does has 2 different materials. It's got what they call IBA, which stimulates root development, building the nutrient factory for the plant. And then it's got GA3, which promotes cell division and elongation. So it works both above and below ground. So it's a plant growth regulator, 3 times the concentration to enhance plant growth and development. You use each container dissolved in water or fertilizer, co-applied in furrow or in foliar applications with chemicals, insecticides, fungicides. I don't know of anything it can't be used with. Costs $7 an acre retail. What you should expect is, he says, realistically 3 to 5 on soybeans, 5 to 10 on corn, but I think he's been really conservative. He says in South America, he says, we never compare this product to nothing. Everybody's using plant growth regulators on all their crops. So he says, we're always comparing to other plant growth regulators. And he says usually, on soybeans especially, he says we're 7 to 8 bushel improvement. Moisture, if moisture is limiting, you won't see as dramatic a response as if it's not. I always tell people the number 1 nutrient is water. And so so if you're under pivot, here in Nebraska, this is a product that will really probably perform better than any place else. I'm going to show you this short little video because it's the best thing Conklin's ever put out on a new product introduction, and it's less than 2 minutes long.
So I know there's a lot of plant growth regulators out there already, and you're probably already using one. A lot of products out there just does one thing. Ours intensifies the growth. The 2 plant growth regulators we have is GA3 and IBA. IBA is for the root development, GA3 is for the above ground So what that does is it gets that plant up out of the ground at a lot faster pace, developing more roots. That's the key to the whole deal, is getting those roots down there, as many roots as possible, because that's the factory to the plant. That's what you got to feed that plant with. So the more nutrients you can extract out of the ground, the more that plant's got the ability to yield. You know, with Intensify, you should be able to see the results immediately. You'll know it's working. I try to make everything farmer friendly. The beauty part about this is you just dump it in your fertilizer tank with very little agitation, you're ready to go. This stuff is easy, simple, ready to use. The benefit of this is my 25 plus years researching on my farm. We research every year. So you're getting that advantage. You don't have to go out there and do this yourself. This is a piggyback to all other Conklin products. So if you're using Amplified D or Amplified L, this goes right on top of it. This is an add-on product. Conklin being in business for 50 years and farmer owned, I mean, they have a long history in agriculture. If you want to see more out of your crops, get them up to a fast start, growing, make more yield, become a champion, I recommend getting hold of your local Conklin distributor and getting some and trying it on your farm and see if it works for you.
So the 4 products, Kip has told me for years, the 4 products he uses on every acre of his 20,000 plus acres is, first of all, he uses our Wex at a quart per acre pre-plant, pre-merge. He uses our Amplified D or L right there on the seed on any crop other than soybeans. Of course, on soybeans he uses the Magnify LST. And then he's got our manganese pint per acre every time he sprays glyphosate on any crop. And then the Kip Keller's Nutrient Compass, what he calls his super juice. And then, of course, Intensify would be added to that now. Another product I just want to mention because it's really important, especially this time of the year, is Guardian. We no longer have the Guardian in the powdered product, but we got it in a liquid form that is so much easier and quicker to use. But nitrogen, it's a nitrogen additive to control the loss of nitrogen, especially by leaching and denitrification. And the new product, we have had so much, we've got more data on this product than any product we've ever introduced. In fact, it was tested a minimum of 4 years at 12 different land-grant colleges as well as Tennessee Valley Authority. And here's probably the best representative data that we've ever had. This is from University of Minnesota, 4 years of testing. And basically what they showed is when you used a rate of 125 pounds of nitrogen and you added the Guardian, you increased yields by an average of 13 bushel an acre. If you had 150 pounds of nitrogen and you added Guardian, you picked up 17 bushel. But what I tell people is forget about this one and just compare these two. With 25 pounds less nitrogen, let's use a round figure, 50 cents a pound for nitrogen, you save 12 bucks. But you spent 8 bucks of that to get your Guardian, so you're still 4 bucks ahead, and you're still yielding an average of 4 bushel more per acre. That's the kind of the perfect scenario, what we're looking for. Lower cost per acre going in, a higher quality nitrogen material being applied to your crop, more secure source of nitrogen because we're not going to lose it to leaching or denitrification. So that's really where most of our nitrogens are lost. So this time of the year, if you got guys going out there and they're side dressing and they're putting on any significant amount of nitrogen, I had a guy call me just yesterday. One of Jordan's guys up here at Schuyler, Nebraska, called me and he says, "Hey," he says, we got one field." He says, "Most of our nitrogen we put on some at planting. We put the balance on as a side dress." But he said, "We got some dryland fields that we're going to put 100% of our nitrogen on, 60 gallons of 32 right up front." A quart and a half of Guardian protects that. And that's really what he was looking for. How high do I have to go? A quart and a half will do it. Francis Childs said this. He said, if you're currently using anhydrous ammonia, and he says you should consider investing the same dollars per acre in UAN solution and Guardian. Instead, he said, for me, that yielded an 8 to 10 bushel per acre yield increase. So again, spending the less dollars or the same dollars, but incorporating Guardian into your nitrogen program will give you that kind of return. So the new product is called Guardian L. It's actually more concentrated, but it's much easier to work with. Very, very fluid product. In fact, I've got samples here if anybody wants to take one with them just to show them to people, because our old original product was really thick. In fact, it was thicker than Wex. I had a guy call me, Chad Briggs, one of our best customers out in southwest Nebraska, and I had for a long time been, and it got away from me. I had it on my voicemail. I saved it on my phone. First time he got 6 totes of Guardian DL, he called me. He says, "Dennis," he said, "we got a problem." He says, "Pumping this stuff's like trying to pump peanut butter," and it is. I mean, you would burn up pumps trying. It would gravity feed, it would siphon, but it would not pump. And this stuff is just a dream by comparison. And it goes into suspension, mixes in easily. It becomes a part of the nitrogen. Nothing there that's going to settle out. So the Guardian L is a great product. And here's kind of the rule of thumb that we follow. If you're putting on 0 to 40 pounds of nitrogen, say at planting, a pint per acre, plenty. If you're doing 40 to 80 pounds, I'd put on a quart. And anything over 80 pounds, I'd put on the full 1.5 quart rate is what you'd use. Todd Hoffman, I wanted to share with you his data because he's been using the product since '07, and he farms 1,200 acres of corn, 800 acres of soybeans out here by Juniata, Nebraska, just actually from the Adams County Fairgrounds. If you take the Highway 6 and go west 6 miles, they're placed on the north side of the road. He's had several field days. I'm sure they're going to have a field day out there this year. But his whole field averages, this was in 15, were 285 to 301 on his corn. Whole field averages. He had a 101 acre field that went 301. That was the first time he'd ever gone over 3. He had his soybeans went from 82.8 to 101. He had a 32 acre field of beans that went 101. First time he'd ever broke 101. And here were the products he was using on his corn. He was using our Amplify L. He was using just 2 gallons of feast is all it was calling for in furrow. His fertility is really good. He's got chelated manganese in there with his glyphosate at 6%, and the 10% boron went in the same time, and then the nutrient compass with glyphosate at 750. His total investment in our products in that scenario there was $29 an acre, and where he had a control strip and checked it, he got an extra 17 bushel per acre for $29. At a net of $21.80 an acre at $3 corn. So on his farm with 1,200 acres of corn, that dropped to the bottom line and added net at $26,000 in 2015. On his soybean program, he used our Magnify LST inoculant in furrow. And just to remind you, in furrow application, if you can apply soybean seed inoculant to the seed, or you can dribble it down the furrow. It's interesting that when you dribble it down the furrow, because you really should increase the rate. So basically the box of Magnify that you get has 4 bladders in it, and each bladder will treat 50 bushel of seed if you're putting it on the seed. But if you're going to put it in furrow, they recommend 2.5 ounces per acre in furrow. So it's going to take a higher rate. Randy Dowdy says the cheapest thing you can do to increase yields, and he's the guy that has the current world record for soybeans at 170 point something. He says you should double inoculate your beans. And a lot of our guys do. And Todd has just been putting it in furrow, but a lot of guys, they'll treat the seed, and then they'll also dribble some in furrow. They'll do both. That's what he means by double inoculating. But anyway, he's just putting it at that 2.5 ounces in furrow, 350 an acre. His soil excido, he's putting in, and I think if you figure it out, I think that's at a 5 ounce rate in furrow of the soil excido. And then he was using the feast chelated calcium, 3%, at a pint, and then a chelated manganese with his glyphosate, and then the Kip Colors Nutrient Compass with his glyphosate. His $21.34 an acre netted him an extra 8 bushel an acre, or an added net profit at $8 beans of $42 an acre, which on 800 acres is $34,000. So you take the 34 and the 26, we drop to the bottom line an extra $60,000 in Todd's operation. So that's exactly the kind of things we're looking for. We have a whole bunch of recorded conference calls, and I've got sheets back here that give you the dial-in numbers. If you say, I'd really like to know more about this, what Jerry Cox does with WEX, you can here's a link that you could click, or you can dial in to the replay, enter that passcode, and then enter this number here, 3 pound, and then you'll hear a message. And I've tried to keep these to 15, 20 minutes, so they're not an hour-long explanation, and we just focus on a particular product. And so here's one on Amplify DNL, here's one on Magnify LST and calcium in furrow for soybeans, here's one on WEX and Jerry Cox, here's soil feast starters and micronutrients, complete with manganese and glyphosate. Sidekick, Corey Oberlander talks about how and where you should be using Sidekick. Guardian L, nitrogen stabilizer. Corey talks about that. Soil Excito, plant growth regulators, Todd Hoffman talks about that. Nutrient Compass, foliar fertilizers, Kip talks about those. And then accurate soil testing and why that's so important and how to do it. Corey talks about that in number 11. Next Tuesday, May 8th, I just got confirmation of this. Write these numbers down. If you'd like to be on a call, we're going to do a call at 7:30 in the morning. It's not scheduled to go more than 30 minutes, and it's not going to. I'll see to that. Kip Cullers is going to be on the phone with us, and he's going to be taking questions, and he's going to be telling us about the intensifiers specifically. We may get a little bit into the nutrient compass, but those we'll probably try to limit our conversation to those two. But anyway, the dial-in number is 712-451-0212, and then the passcode will be 221125 pound. And this is going to be on the same bridge that all those others. So once we have the call, it will be recorded, and it will be available for replay. So if you can't be with us on the call, the dial-in number to listen to the replay will be this one up here. This will be the replay number. This is the passcode. I'm guessing the next one will be 12, but I don't know. We may have had some other calls recorded in between there. But at any rate, so we will have replay available to listen to after the call. But Kip's agreed to do it. He's going to actually be down at a field day in Oklahoma at Chris Ledbetter's. It's a wheat field day that they're doing. But he said he'd be available from 7:30 to 8 to be with us on this call. So Kip will be available to talk specifically about those products.
What was that number?
This is the number for the actual live call, 712-451-0212. Again, 7:30 Central Time next Tuesday, May 8th is when we're going to be doing that.
And what was the access code for the replay?
Access code, well, the reference number, the access code is the very same access code. The reference number will be different, and I'll publicize that. We post everything, first thing place I post it is on Facebook, Family Show on Facebook, but then I get it to Ben and he puts it on Nextcloud. And on Nextcloud we can list not only the actual replay numbers, but we can also list the links. So you, if you got a smartphone, you can just tap the link and it'll start playing for you. You just find it on the internet, you can play it. Okay, so what makes, people ask me all the time and say, well, what makes AgriVantage unique? You know, there's lots of really great companies out there with a lot of really great products. And I say, well, we do have some unique products and some proprietary technologies. We do have some things that are unique, but a lot of companies have things that are unique. But we do have premier industry-leading crop production training intensives. The Pro Ag 1, the Pro Ag 2, our field days are really, I think they're the best out there. And then the third thing is, because of the first two, and because so many of the NCGA Yield Champions have found us, they went looking for us, because honestly, we don't do a lot of national advertising. We're not easy to find. We're not necessarily easy to do business with. You know, we have to ship it to you. We have to, you know, we don't have a store. We don't have tanks sitting out here that, you know, you call me up, Don, and you need an extra 50 gallons of fertilizer. I'm probably not going to be able to get it to you before you need to be through planting. So, Denny Allen provides that service. Okay. You know. So, at any rate, but the fact of the matter is that with all that, we've got this network of people. And I give you what I think is the best example I can tell you about this. I was at the sale barn in Imperial, Nebraska. Stan Smith, who works with me here in Lincoln, he's off on a trip. He's going to be down. He and Vicki are celebrating their 44th anniversary, and they're going to the Kentucky Derby on Saturday. So they're down in Kentucky, going around and seeing a bunch of the horse tracks. He just sent me a picture today, Ben, of a horse that's a Triple Crown winner that their farm feeds Fast Track to every horse every day. And I was talking about that. But at any rate, Stan has a son that owns the sale barn down there at Imperial, Preston Smith. And so we get out there at least once a month. And so we're down there. And Corey Oberlander came down with us to do a meeting there at the sale barn. And Corey, just before the meeting, we're getting set up for it. Bob Waldemuth, one of our district managers from Imperial, walks up to me and says, Dennis, he says, I just got a phone call from a guy. He says, this guy's interested in using some of our products. He grows a lot of rice. I said, oh, interesting. I said, you're talking to the wrong guy. But I knew, because of the network we've got, I knew that there'd be somebody out there that knows. And I thought of a couple of guys, and so I immediately texted. Wasn't 15 minutes later, and it just so happened The 15 minutes later, it was Kip Cullers who sent me a text back, and he said, here's the products you need to use, Guardian and Amplify, and he was going through it. And he happened to be at the time in Brazil, but he texted me back. And so, we've got this network of people that have had experience and know what it takes to, use our products and use them effectively. So, you can learn more, and there's a bunch. This is not 300bushelcorn.info is strictly a YouTube channel that we've got, and we've got about 65, maybe 70 videos up there. This video will be posted up there, but we post, and most of them are very short. Most of them are 5-10 minutes long at the most, but they're on specific topics with specific folks. I've got interviews up there with Francis Childs and with Kip and with other people, and so it's a way to find out about different products. We were talking about the potatoes. We've got some testimonials up there on potatoes and their use with our products. And so it's it's just kind of a collection of things and ideas and training and education that you might find helpful in growing your crops. So with that, I appreciate your attention tonight, and so we can go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks.